Thanks for joining us for our Chamber Connection podcast. Thanks to our friends at Speakeasy, we are here for the next 52 weeks, bringing you guests from around our community, elected officials, business owners, folks doing great work here in Macomb County. So sit back, take a listen, and we hope you'll join us every week for our Chamber Connection. Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this edition of the Chamber Connection. My guest today is a familiar face to fans at the friends at the Chamber, Princess Castleberry. Good morning, Princess. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fantastic.
Thank you for being here with me this morning. So, Princess, you most recently hosted our last Women's Business Alliance event, our WBA event, and we had 75 women in the room talking about something near and dear to all of our hearts, how to avoid burnout on your team. But you have a whole new focus that you've been able to feature your Go Beyond Well health. No, Go Beyond Well.
Yes, Go Beyond Well.
So tell me a little bit about Go Beyond Well.
So Go Beyond Well is my baby. Go Beyond Well is a company that literally equips people to solve their wellness challenges inside and outside of work. And so what I was finding in talking to various clients through coaching engagements, HR consulting engagements, is that people were having lots of issues, right, with managing burnout, for one, right, that we just covered, but just a whole host of communication issues, being triggered by things in the workplace and not understanding it. And so I started to ask one of the CEOs that I work with, well, how would you handle that communication issue at home with your wife? And at first he was a little taken aback because this was a communication issue he was having with an engineering leader in his company. And I said, how would you handle that with your wife? How would you interpret what you were hearing? So as he opened up and started to share with me how he approaches situations at home, I actually discovered the disconnect in his communication style. And he says, well, that's home. And then it just clicked to me. I said, no, most people's wellness issues start at home. Right? Because that's where we love. That's where we're dedicated to our families. And that's where we actually have the most opportunity for conflicts in our personal life. And I realized that people who had an issue drawing boundaries or communicating clearly and concisely at home with their families were having the same issues in the workplace. And it just sparked a whole host of ideas. And so I actually redirected the focus of my risk and HR consultancy to wellness, but this particular link between personal wellness and workplace wellness.
And so post-pandemic, wellness has become quite the topic of conversation. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And it's because really wellness is and has always been everywhere, in everything. Now, so, for the first 20 years of my career, if you would have said, Princess, tell me about your career, who are you? I am a risk manager. And when you think about what a risk is, it's the possibility of harm or loss to something of value. And that's just my simple definition. So when you think about the things that you value, your health, your mental health, especially coming out of the pandemic, your overall well-being, your financial security, there is not a way to think about all these aspects of your wellness and not think about what puts them at risk. So I saw this great synergy and alignment between the way we approach risk and the way we should be approaching wellness. There's risk in everything that we do, especially as business owners and business women or anybody for that matter. There's risk in everything, and every aspect of life is connected to our wellness. So I decided to take a risk approach to
And what have been
wellness.
some of the success stories that you've seen of people that have really kind of, when you talk about your colleague that said he communicates differently at home and at work, how often do we say, but you spend more time with those people at work than you probably do at home, right? Especially if you're in an office situation now. What are things that people, give me one tip that someone can do to communicate better in the workplace?
Well, the first part of any wellness, overcoming any wellness challenge is raising your awareness. So the first step is to just be mindful and just take that pause and understand, how are you showing up in the workplace in the first place? What is your communication style and how does it change from situation to situation? So when you think about the challenges that arise in the workplace and understand what about what was said to me triggered me. Was it the tone? Was it the subject matter? You have to like really take
I'm
that
thinking of
time.
past conversations I've had, either
Yeah.
as a manager of people or having someone manage me, and I'm thinking of some of those conversations.
Yeah, and I know that's so abstract, but it's literally to observe.
Sure.
Observe your behavior. Observe the behavior of people around you. Are you having conflicts in the workplace first thing in the morning? Is it coming off of a certain meeting? Are you sort of triggered or engaged by a particular type of news that you've heard? Is it because somebody's always bearing bad news but have no solutions? Things like that. So honestly, it's not really like this very simple tip
Sure.
of do this. It's really a way of being. And I say this all the time. Most people live life backwards. They think if they're doing certain things, then they will have things that they want, and then they will be happy. They will be peaceful. They'll be effective. You have to have a do have life. You have to choose how you're going to be first. And so coming into the workplace, choosing as a leader that you're going to be a listener, that you're going to be clear, that you're going to be prepared, be concise. Showing up that way gives you a better opportunity to control communication around you and control the outcomes. And again, that's where you see this intertwining between risk and wellness.
Absolutely.
It's leaders have so much responsibility for organizational wellness. They set so much of the tone. They really can dictate how somebody else's life is going to be just by how they show up, the voice that they use, whether or not, have you ever experienced either, I won't say have you done it yourself, but have you experienced the meeting after the meeting?
Yes.
The meeting ends and you know that when you drop off the line or when you leave the room, there's a second conversation where more information is shared that adds more clarity to the situation, or people start to resolve conflicts that might involve you, but now you're out of the room. That right there, that simple practice of talking about people after they've left the room creates so much conflict in the workplace. And so those tips, really,
Sure.
if you will, are to be aware of your own presence as a communicator and a leader. Be aware of your messaging. Are you being clear, concise, and are you including everybody that you're talking about?
I was just thinking when you said you said something earlier about coming in. It's how do you come into the office in the morning?
Mm-hmm.
And I had a experience where I had an hour-long drive in traffic to work every day.
Yep.
And it was stressful. And do you know what I was like when I walked in? I
can imagine.
Flustered. Did I find the right parking spot? Did I get stuck in traffic?
Yes.
Did I make it in on time? All of those things.
Yes.
I didn't realize until I had removed myself from that situation and had another job that experience of how I started my workday was not how, anyone should want to start a workday.
Right. Because traffic, that whole experience of getting through traffic can trigger you in so many ways,
Yeah.
right? Because what is driving, right? This is like acrobatics and near misses.
And you hope that everyone else had their cup of coffee that morning.
The whole way. I mean, it's such an intense, that's why, that your hands should be on the wheel. You shouldn't be distracted. There's so much memory that your brain builds up on the route, right? That your brain knows how to get from point A to point B without a lot of effort. But it's everything else that happens that you have to be so aware of. So people don't even realize driving is such an exhausting task. It really is. When you think about all the muscles that you use, the focus, and if you're really truly paying attention, just to try to navigate all the obstacles. So when you get to a place, and I don't care if you had a long commute or a short commute, you should always have what we call a moment of arrival. And I learned that practice. One of my dearest friends is a mindfulness and meditation expert. And if you recall from our presentation, I started out with a mindful moment.
Yes.
I learned that from her, just to come in and have a moment of arrival. and just have that sense that, let me take a deep breath. Inhale in, exhale out. Inhale through the nose, exhale, and just relax and just celebrate the fact that I arrived here safely. Have that moment to feel the tenseness of your muscles and just to let it go. And so I start every single presentation I do now with mindfulness and just a short 60 seconds of meditation, because people are carrying so much.
Just going to say all the things they brought there that morning.
Yeah. And they need a chance to just acknowledge that happened to them, that that commute with all those turns and that person that cut you off, that didn't happen to anybody else in the world but you. Now, there's a bunch of people who had similar experiences, but nobody had your exact unique experience. And it's just acknowledging that everybody in the room had some experience, some challenge getting here. And now we've arrived here together. Now we can be one. Now we can be on one page, and our slate is equal.
When you start presentations like that, do you notice, can you see a change in your participants? Because we all have our eyes closed in the audience. So what do you see? Do you see shoulders kind of release and people take a deep breath?
People are amazing when you give them directions.
I'm a good direction follower.
And when you give people clear directions, I mean, seriously, people listen to what you're saying, and you see the skeptics in the audience. And so I look around, and so what I get is this: somebody is going like this. They breathe in, and then they breathe out. And I say, okay, exhale. And they're like, oh yeah. And I say, and let your shoulders go. And if you got a table in front of you and you're not shy, let your tummy go. Because we're like all day, like,
right,
trying to look like that size 8.
No, I don't know the last time I was.
I was a size 8 when I was 8. Let's just admit it. But I'm a whole grown woman, lived a whole life, so I'm okay with me. But just letting that go and letting your body relax. I have to scan the audience and tell people, okay, drop the shoulders, because they're like, they breathe in and they're still up here with it. No.
Let it out.
Exhale and let yourself be heard. An audible sigh. People in a room full of people, even sometimes when it's just me one-on-one with a coaching client, that audible sigh is so hard for people to let go. And what I'm telling you is that there's so much stress that your body wants to exhale, just to get your mind right, just to get your brain fired up. That's how learning occurs. And so I don't know. I bring it up. The other big part of my background is that I'm an instructional designer. That's what I went to Oakland University. Shout out Grizzlies.
Grizzlies.
And then that was for grad school. But I studied training and development. And that's what my master's degree is in. And so I know how to teach, and I know how to prepare the mind and the room and, the presentation for learning.
When you look at organizations, in the last 3 years, workplaces have become very different.
Yeah.
So many people have a workplace that might be now in their home, or they might be a traveling worker now, and they're going into work a couple days, during the week. And, my team's very different. We're all in the office every day, which, I think we all like. We're a service-based organization, so we provide a service. So we need to be there to serve. But how do leaders of organizations now have to really look back on these last couple of years and realize that they now have completely different employees there from what they've been through? We all experience something different. People are all in different places. How do leaders work with a team like that? How should they be talking to people?
Yeah. So the first thing is really just what you just did, just acknowledging that, we've all been through this pandemic, but we've all had different experiences. So I always suggest having a listening party, right? Or a listening tour. And you might hear that term when it relates to somebody dropping their latest album, but no, just go around a simple set of questions. Ask, to the extent possible, could you share some of your unique experiences during the pandemic? How has it changed you? How do you look at work now? And just pausing and listening, right? You get so much information because people are taken aback when you ask that. Now, on the business side of things, leaders, especially now, have to do a much better job of establishing their metrics. What does success look like?
It's so different.
It looks so different now, and there needs to be some adjustment for an adjustment of priorities. Businesses had a hard time accepting that people's priorities had shifted inward for the first time because we were all taught, right, over the last 20 years, put the company first, put your team first. And the pandemic was like, pause, put yourself first, dial into your family, check your mental health, all these things. So there was this huge shift, and it is not temporary. This is an awakening, right? And so it shifted work. So now the priorities have to shift. But I'm a capitalist, like business still has to happen, so there's a balance. And I think that balance comes from leaders defining, like, what is the work that we do? Why was it successful in the past? Like, you have a lot of leaders saying, I want people in the office because that's how we're going to preserve our culture. But that same leader cannot articulate what parts of their culture made the business successful. Sure. Is it the collaboration? Was it the time savings because we sat next to each other, for 6 hours out of the day, 6-7 hours? Was it the fact that you could pop over to my desk and troubleshoot an issue in person and read my body language when you presented an idea? What made us successful? That's the hard part, but that is the challenge of leadership, is to define what success looks like, communicate that very clearly, and be okay if somebody can do it in 4 hours versus 6. I made this comment at a meeting last week, that the other big challenge coming off of the pandemic is that economically, we had a lot of ground to make up as businesses. And if you aggregate that as a country,
sure,
we still have a lot of ground to make up. So businesses thought they were going to ratchet up the work. Okay. Wow, I found out that somebody can do the job in 5 hours instead of 8. I'm going to pile more work on, without really defining what the end looks like, what success or balance looks like. When that happened and they accelerated, growth targets, and growth targets went from 5% to 20% because we have to make up ground. At whose expense? Right? And so that's what started to happen. And people were adjusting and trying to come into this new mindset, trying to get back to work because we wanted to work, and then being met with a crushing weight of undefined targets, just needing more, not understanding what more meant. And it turns into a lot of confusion. And that's why you start to see a rise of burnout and some of the other things.
Just going to say, and this is where the burnout comes from.
Yeah.
I think we all looked at burnout when you were with us a couple weeks ago so differently, right? Because burnout, and the one thing I've taken away from this conversation was about decision making.
Yes.
I have talked about having decision fatigue for a long time. I never want to be the person that has to pick what she's having for dinner because, I give me appetizers for dinner any day of the week when I can have 3 different things. But you said something that stuck with me about women and women making, decisions. Mm-hmm. And when we get dressed in the morning, and you said, how many decisions did you make before you walked out of the house? From what did you wear, from, your pants, your shoes, your jackets, your jewelry, whatever else that goes into makeup, hair. Did you pack a lunch? Did you make this person? Did you take care of your kids? And that's all before you put the car and drive and, back down your driveway.
Yeah. Before you get to the office, having to make, we're talking to executives.
Right.
Before you made any executive decision, before you're making decisions about chicken nuggets or mergers and acquisitions.
Right.
I mean, the spectrum of decisions that women make in particular, it's really, really daunting when you think about just how much of our time, talent, and energy get used up on stuff like that. And that's why we have to create routine. We have to automate things. My calendar is automated. I use, this is not a plug for any business, but Calendly saved my life. Okay.
I had it for a while. I'm going to have to jump back on this one.
Seriously, like sending out that link and saying, hey, you choose. If somebody says, hey, can we get together for lunch? I have a separate link because you can set up as many links as you want on Calendly, and they can all have different schedules. So that's like a one-time, time investment is to get it all set up. But I send out that lunch link. I tell people, I'm coming from Auburn Hills. You know where you're coming from. Find us a place in the middle. And I put that all off of me. I tell them I'm not allergic to anything, and I'm a super flexible eater. So I'll find something everywhere. I'll find something everywhere. you choose, right? Because I don't know. I don't want to go into, are you vegan? Do you have a gluten allergy? We have so many things today. I don't want to do all that. And that helps me. But then on the more serious side, because I do slow down and observe what's happening with my body, how do I feel? How am I showing up? I am aware, right? I'm aware of what triggers me. That is the key to burnout. People want to just jump into, oh, what's the solution? Do I just get a clock or do I do time blocking? And there's all these practical solutions. But I find that the first thing that you have to do if you feel like you're experiencing burnout is to assess at what level. Because like I talked about at the event, burnout is stage 4 on a 5-level scale. So what are you really talking about? Are you stressed? Are you in chronic stress, or are you truly in burnout? So understanding where you are and what the symptoms are, right? Burnout is more serious than people think. And then understanding too, what happens in the brain. When you're in burnout, what's happening? You start to make decisions from your fear center. That's what happens. You get triggered. You start to make more of your decisions from your fear center. I don't want to get too technical, but like the amygdala, you start making a lot of decisions in that part of the brain versus making decisions in your prefrontal cortex, where rational thinking and decision making and context come in. It can be very, very dangerous to let yourself get to a true point of burnout because it will affect
Well, I was going to say,
everything
is
you
this
do.
where like impulse decisions come from?
Absolutely.
And, making poor choices come from?
Absolutely, it does. I mean, when we see women leaders, especially running their businesses, trying to run their households, as married women or as single moms, we're every woman, right?
Try to do it all.
And we've done it, right? Soccer mom to board mom, boardroom, and so when you get into those situations where you're truly burned out, you can have some impulse control issues that lead to you working outside of your scope of services. It can lead to impulsive contracting, right, with bad trade-offs. Anybody ever signed a deal and thought,
I shouldn't have done that.
holy, holy,
I
shouldn't have done that. And then when you think about, I'm not just talking about sole proprietors. I'm talking about women who run enterprises. You're the sales leader. You signed a deal under impulse, and now you've committed your implementation team to something your company can't deliver on. Now, think about that. That's what I help people do. Connect their personal wellness challenges to the downstream impact to the business. When you think about all these personal challenges coming together in a workplace, it is a very difficult thing to manage on your own. And that's why people like me exist.
And that's why how do people find you, Princess?
Listen, I'm all over LinkedIn. I'm a shameless extrovert.
You are a great LinkedIn person. You are phenomenal at it.
Come find me. I might be the only Princess Castleberry. And so, but
as you should be.
They can find me on LinkedIn.
This is a really cool,
my website, of course.
It's a really cool concept though. Like we've talked about, like, as a leader and as an employer of people, how do I become more empathetic?
Yes.
That has been my goal too, post-pandemic. Like, right? Like, how do I acknowledge that, does my team have to worry about getting children somewhere? Do they have health crisis? Are they taking care of parents? Are they, and we're all in a different spot. And, acknowledging that was probably, when we came back, was probably the biggest realization for me, is that we all handled this very differently.
Yep.
But we all, like you said, how many different personalities come together in one morning to get a job done?
Exactly.
And what did you leave behind?
Exactly. And let me tell you something about empathy. It is wonderful when a leader is empathetic. It's wonderful. But guess what? That is not everybody's natural tendency. True. And so the first thing, again, in acknowledging and accepting people for where they come from, is just to admit that's not everybody. Everybody isn't empathetic, but you should be. And there are benefits to being. And so it's funny because I was in a discussion. I was in Chicago a couple weeks ago, and somebody, they were going through this panel and asking, how are people using ChatGPT? How are you using AI technology?
Big conversation this week.
And I was the only non-technical person. Everybody else on the panel were like engineering leaders and or engineering instructors. And I brought up empathy. And I said, you know what? Everybody's not empathetic. And some people just laugh because they're like, we're all supposed to be, but we're not. Everybody's not empathetic. I said, so you know what? If you're coming back post, let's say somebody in your organization loses a loved one, loses a pet, go to ChatGPT and say, what are 5 things I could ask somebody who just lost their beloved pet to show my empathy? AI will say, oh, that's a great question. And it'll give you a script. Sometimes, and I don't consider that insincere, because as a leader, you have to be sincere to acknowledge that, you know what, my empathy skills and my natural empathy is not as high as I want it to be. That's a gap. And that's a cool way, I think, in a simple way, to use AI to just get a prompt going, to understand that, oh, I could start a conversation this way. I didn't think of approaching it this way. I never had a pet.
What a great use of,
of
tech. I would be someone, I've never had a pet.
Me either.
But I realize that pets are
important to some people.
They're part of their family members. Yes. And so you're right. Like that would be an area where I, as a leader, would need some help because I've never experienced the loss of a pet.
Exactly. And I've never experienced it. In my mind, I can't even, I have children, so I can't, I'm like, wow, people call them their fur babies.
Absolutely.
And so that's like, those are their kids to them and they love their pets. And I want to care. I do. I want to express that warmth and that empathy, but it's not natural for me with regard to pets. And so look, I may or may not have been the person who needed to look up that script. But also, why I had that example.
As a leader, it's a great place to acknowledge what you don't know.
Absolutely.
And finding the resources that you can.
Isn't that what leaders do?
Princess, I think we have solved all the problems of the world. I could actually probably talk to you all day. Remind us again your website.
It is www.gobeyondwell.com.
And I think that this is such an important conversation for all of our chamber members and our businesses to be having. Yes. As workforce changes and people change, it's acknowledging where they're at. And I think that, our folks can certainly find you, can look for you. Thank you for being here, sharing your wealth of knowledge. I probably could have talked to Princess all day. But I hope our listeners and our viewers look for you, check you out, check up your website, find her on LinkedIn, because I can learn a lot.
Listen to my TEDx talk.
But yeah, you are just phenomenal. Thank you for sharing information, for being a resource to all of us, but acknowledging we all have some work to do at the same time.
We do.
Thank you again for listening to the Chamber Connection podcast, and we will see you the next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Chamber Connection. Be sure to check out information on the Sterling Heights Regional Chamber of Commerce website, our Facebook page, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We look forward to you connecting with us and tuning in next week.